I don't consider myself someone who gets swept up with ridiculous expectations for video games, but I admit, despite myself, I had some very lofty ideas for what this game could be. Although it never lived up to those ambitious ideas of mine, this game proved to be quite good. An open-world, swashbuckling adventure across the length of the old world would appeal to most Warhammer fans. And it delivers, even if it is marred by a lack of polish in some areas. You begin with a single Corsair, and it's up to you on how you go about accumulating your wealth and power in an open sandbox filled with other factions. But before all that, we have to get through character creation. You get a few options to customize your look and your ship's flag, but overall it's pretty limited. Initially, you have to start as an independent captain, but after you complete the tutorial, you'll unlock a few more options. Speaking of, on your first playthrough, you'll be forced to go through that tutorial, and it throws you right into combat. Starting with ship to ship, the game plays quite well. For the moment, you're limited to broadsiding with your Corsair, and it controls very simply. You're presented with a firing arc, and you have some limited ability to maneuver it relative to your ship. All ships in the game are comprised of compartments, which can be individually damaged to different effect. Sections with cannons, for example, can be destroyed to handicap enemy firepower, or sails can be crippled to limit maneuverability. Both are helpful, but by far the most important ship section is the hull elements below the waterline. Put enough holes in that, and the enemy go from sailing a ship to sailing a sieve, and soon after go to sailing nothing at all. All the cannons in the world can't help you when you've got no hull left. Take down a couple of little ships, and you're grappled by a much larger one.
Time for some melee boarding action.
And it's, certainly something. The words stupendously clunky come to mind. It's hard to tell what you, or your enemies for that matter, are doing. It devolved quickly into a meaningless button-mashing mess for a lot of it. Run up and stab people in the back when they're engaged. That's the pirate way. Either that, or pull out a pistol and shoot them from behind. Both work quite well. The art book for the game recounts some of the details of the game's development. The developers were implementing a lot of player feedback, and the melee system wasn't initially going to be included. Well, that certainly could explain the jankiness of it. An overworked indie team tries to implement a system they had initially cut for fear of it being too much for them, only to try and put it back in for the good of the player base. It's actually quite commendable in a way, and it's understandable that it would feel a bit rough. That doesn't really make it any nicer to play. For a while I wondered if perhaps the game would have been better off if these elements had been left out entirely, but I think as rough as they are, their absence would have been a noticeable letdown. And despite everything, it does have its fun moments. Something else struck me here. Take a listen and tell me what you hear. The clash of swords, the crack of gunshots. Perhaps you even hear the sound of my audience retention figures flatlining. But that aside, tell me, is there anything in the background that indicates who we are fighting against? It's strangely generic. Other games would make a real effort to make the sound design representative of a particular faction. So there are some weird sound issues, but again they're limited to mostly the boarding actions. This again shows that the melee stuff is just kinda scuffed. After mopping up the assault, you are directed to the nearby port of Norden, where you get paid for helping out. On the advice of your first mate, you head right to the tavern to pick up a sharpshooter. Nothing helps you get your eye in like a little green alcohol. After all, if you're seeing double, there's a good chance you'll hit at least one. The sharpshooter sets up in the crow's nest and will take shots down at enemy crew or boarders during combat. But he isn't just an upgrade. You can directly take control of him through a radial menu and take shots yourself. The town is small, but it does its job as a sort of hub. We don't have a lot of business here yet, and a lot of the choices are locked out to help you through the tutorial anyway. The second leg of the tutorial has us hauling some trade goods over to a port in Kislev. This is where we first get introduced to the time-speed mechanics. You can speed time up or down using the plus and minus buttons. This is the game's way of making a long-haul trip convenient. While on the open seas, you can move as fast as 8 times regular speed. Or stop time entirely if you'd like. It certainly works, but I find it gives the ship an eerie, floaty quality on the open ocean. You may point out that floating is in fact quite normal for a ship, but what I mean is that the ship seems to glide over the waves without really interacting with them. It's perhaps not the best solution to this problem. You can place a waypoint on the map and have the ship take you there automatically, but even at 8 times speed, it's gonna take a while to get somewhere. Probably best to have a podcast on standby. En route, your ship will get intercepted by a massive megalodon. The encounter swaps back and forth between on-deck small arms fire until it breaks away, and broadsiding it as it approaches again. It's certainly a gripping encounter, but it's dealt with easily enough, after which the journey to Kislev can resume. The Kislev port does have a different feel to it, which is nice. It's snowing, and the lit braziers give a feeling of that cold environment. The layout is different too, not conforming to the same square shape as the last port. It is, however, still quite small. Goods sold, and the next stop is to repair your ship. The more damaged your ship is, the more it costs. You get a certain amount of damage repaired for free when reaching a port. This is the crux of the difficulty scaling. You have 3 to choose from, easy, normal and hard, and each are defined by how much free repair you get. After the repairs, you're a bit more free to do things around town, although you are still technically in the tutorial. You can get a quick look at the notice board, which offers a variety of quests. I picked up a quest for a delivery to the next port over, and another to bring in some weapon supplies for trading. Leaving the port, you once again run into orcs. This time, we are responsible for running off a small raiding party heading for Kislev's shores. This engagement is a bit more of a free-for-all, leaving you to handle the enemies any way you feel. Being a bit more open, it gives you a good appreciation of the importance of having the wind at your back in combat. The orcs have no such considerations, as they are propelled by paddles. But the Corsair is a pure sail ship. Trying to move into the wind is going to get you nowhere fast. Wrap up the orcs and receive a reward back at port, and then that's it. You're cut loose. Not only does that represent the end of the tutorial, but also of the most structured part of the game. It's all just a big sandbox from this point. Well, the first mate said it himself. There are plenty of opportunities to get rich and famous on the shores of the old world. I wrap up that delivery quest I got during the tutorial, and start visiting some of the ports along the northern coast of the Empire to pick up odd jobs. A few things become clear relatively quickly. First, that the quests from the notice board come in 2 types. The first is a sort of generic quest, generated based on the conditions of the world, basic delivery, request for trade, or ship hunt quests, as well as a fair few others. They are serviceable, but get very repetitive after a while. They also keep themselves very contained. The objectives tend to only take you 1 or 2 ports away, or just offshore, and when you arrive at a new port, there's good odds that any quest you pick up will send you back the way you came. The second type of quest is the story quest, for lack of a proper name. They've got a bit more, well, story to them. If you accept one from the notice board, you're given a little information to go with it. A scene is set with a character or 2 petitioning the captain to complete a task, and they can be quite varied. They range from transporting a mythical hammer that conducts lightning, hauling grain to a nearby Bretonnian port only to discover that it's full of Skaven, or getting unfathomably drunk in the pub with your first mate, then setting out to take a ship or 2 before sobering up. But perhaps the best part of these quests are the choices you get to make. More general quests don't offer you any alternative outcomes if they're done correctly. Do the task, get paid. The more story-driven quests, however, become more involved. You could deliver this heirloom flaming sword back to its owner, or you could keep it for yourself. Should you turn in the fleeing pirate, he claims you won't get a fair trial if you do. They don't revolutionise the whole gameplay loop or anything, but it keeps things more interesting. It seems just about every port in the game has at least one of these more substantial quests. I've heard some criticism on the over-reliance of waypoints for the quests. I'm not sure how to feel about that. A lot of the quests do just point you to exactly where you need to be, true. But searching open ocean for a specific target does not strike me as engaging. If you were told, for example, a ship has raided us and was last seen heading northwest, well, searching for one specific target on a predominantly flat, featureless environment probably isn't going to be the most thrilling time. But then again, maybe I've just been spoiled by the use of quest markers in almost every game I've ever played. But I think the waypoints are the way to go here. There is an option to turn them off, but to keep quest information on. That keeps information at the top of the screen where active quests are listed, but without at least some vague sense of direction in the quest information, it doesn't really make it a feasible alternative. But it is an option there if that's the kind of thing you want to try. The journey down the coast will take you through all the different cultures the game represents. Each region has its own port design, illustrating their unique cultures, but you'll quickly notice a lot of the towns are reused. This is probably because it was another late addition from player feedback. Honestly, it's not too bad. The amount of time you spend in town compared to sailing is quite small, and only in a few instances did it actually cause any confusion. They are also largely the same in what functions they offer. There's always a shipwright for repairs and upgrades, although a specific harbour town is necessary for more advanced options. And there's always a tavern, a provisions provider, clothes stall and weapons stalls. Back out on the open ocean, you will find yourself facing many different opponents. It's not just the folk that settled the coast of the old world you need to contend with, from fleets of Skaven plague ships, orc boarding parties, and pirate convoys, to Empire patrol ships, and the Romans? Fun fact, rats flee sinking ships because if they don't, they will drown. When attacking ships, you can sink them outright or you can board them. If you board successfully and take the ship, you gain access not only to all of its cargo, but the ship itself. You can seize the vessel by sending a few crew members over in order to take it back to a port of your choosing. Doing so requires a small sacrifice on your part, as every crew member you send over to manage your new prize takes someone away from doing their job on your own ship. On paper, this makes capturing ships a bit of an investment, as claiming too many in one journey can leave you with a skeleton crew, but you only really need to sacrifice one crew member per ship captured, meaning you can mitigate the loss of efficiency by heading back to port regularly. The crew you sent back will be waiting for you in the tavern to hire them back again, without any additional upfront charges. How kind of them. You can also attack ports in the same way you can attack ships. First eliminate the defences, then raid the colony. Pirate ports will also spawn, and these can be your target if you're not looking to annoy any of the other major factions. If you find a faction you enjoy, you can petition to join. In addition to notice boards, every faction has its own place to offer faction-specific quests. They are noticeably different than their notice board counterparts.
The world simulates interactions between factions.
Wars start and end, trade goes up and down, and differences can be put aside to fight against a common foe. Faction quests play into this dynamic. Before joining, you'll be asked to do things like deliver spies, or defend a port from an incoming attack. If you want to stay independent,
You can balance doing these lower tier missions for a profit without angering anyone unconsolably.
just bounce around a few factions to spread things out. With Trust 4, you can pitch in your lot with your chosen faction. You'll then be offered more and better quests. Completing quests and sinking ships affords you the ability to level up and pick some perks, and there are some for just about every playstyle. They range from stronger hulls, to better cannons, a focus on melee, or better damage with small arms. It's what you expect. Regardless of whether or not you choose to remain independent, by this point you're likely to have some cash. And there's a fair amount you can spend it on. Probably the most useful will be the ship upgrades. Heavier guns, more guns, heavier armour, or a streamlined hull are all good choices. But these are purchased not only at the cost of gold, but of your limited cargo capacity. Conversely, you can upgrade your cargo capacity at the expense of your hull strength, allowing you to spec into a bit more of a mercantile playthrough. You could also choose to replace your ship entirely. The Empire and Bretonnia both offer competing lines of ships, with their own strengths and drawbacks. The biggest difference is, speaking in the broadest terms, Bretonnian ships focus their firepower into broadsides, whereas the Empire ships distribute their firepower more evenly, including both bow and stern chaser guns. However, there are a number of more unique ships you can take the time to master with quite niche applications. Also, borderline essential, is the anti-flyer weaponry. Ships, including your own, can be equipped with a flyer unit. You can order your own to do things like scout or harass enemy ships. When the enemy does that to you, you had better have a way to counter them. If you don't, you're stuck firing your own personal small arms at them when they come in to fight. That's not ideal. Or you could head over to the tavern. Aside from taking rest and seeing the latest trade rumours, you can pick up new recruits here. You could also set your mind to building a fleet of your own. From the tavern, you can hire allied captains to serve under your command. Or alternatively, if you capture a ship, you can hire a captain for relatively little to use the ship for you. When commanding a fleet, you can give ships orders, right down to the individual level. But concentration of force seems to be the only truly effective way of marshalling your fleet. Alone, the AI seems to have a hard time dealing with things. You could recruit a wizard from the tavern. Much like sharpshooters, they are specialists on your crew that you can take control of at any time, or simply leave them to automatically cast spells at hostile ships. There's a general goods and provisions store, most useful for buying provisions for your crew while at sea. Everybody's got to eat. But it is also here you do all your trading. It is as you expect. Some places have things in abundance, others are in need. If you play as a trader, it is your job to take advantage of this great material continuum. The final two stalls in town are the clothes stall and the weapons stall. Clothes appeared to be mostly about aesthetics, but weapons are as useful to a pirate as just about anything can be, especially the firearms. Better yet, they can be bought and given to your crew to help them deal more damage. Unfortunately, no matter your chosen occupation in this world, the sea monsters are always going to be there, and there's no way around it. They are simply annoying. At first, they come across as some big event, damned exciting stuff. But in reality, no. Firstly, they are far too common, and a huge number of them hug the shoreline, meaning if you want to get anywhere, you're likely to have to fight one off. And to compound this annoyance, fighting them is a drawn-out process, mostly consisting of them diving underwater, you waiting, and then they surface for you to take a few shots at, then repeat. There's even an option to turn them off entirely in the menu. I think that's kind of telling in its own way. The only reasons to really fight them is that their drops are fairly valuable and can be used to craft some high-end gear. There is a book that comes with the DLC if you choose to get it. It's called Fell Cargo. It features a monster attack too. Even the thought of these beasts being out there is treated as being somewhat ridiculous. Although a few claim to have seen these beasts at a distance, only one has any real first-hand experience. When, a little later in the book, a beast does attack the protagonists, it's treated as something big for them. That's the way these things should be handled. With awe and fear that this terrible, mythical beast has sought you out. But I saw two of them while making a casual trading run between two ports. What's most frustrating, though, is that the solution to this issue seems fairly straightforward to me. You take the encounters, and you move them out to sea, drop their numbers slightly, and then up the value of their loot. By doing this, you make the deep ocean region of the map more useful, as there's precious little reason to go there, and then you'd make monster hunting an interesting and valuable profession, rather than the annoying roadblock you just have to deal with. The game wraps up with retirement, where you get an ending based on stats like money, fame, and infamy. The various stats will be tracked across the game, and it's fairly straightforward where everything comes from. You'll get a paragraph for each stat, generating the ending to your captain's story. Does he retire rich into a life of luxury, or broken destitute? But like many Warhammer games, there's also a Chaos campaign to consider. The recommended start for your first time is playing as a worshipper of Khorne. Rather than gold and fame, your goal is to gather as much favour from the gods as possible. It takes you through a brief tutorial, where you sink ships and raze cities to the ground in the name of the ruinous powers. It's the same mechanics you've already experienced, but settlement battles are much larger than ship battles. Your whole fleet can even chip in. You get new tools and resources by directly petitioning your god, spending favour to get new crew, upgrades, and ships for the fleet. On your travels, you can encounter champions of the other gods, beating them in a duel, and you'll not only claim their ship as your own for the fleet, but you'll also gain access to petition your gods for any ship that would have otherwise been unique to someone else. If you like the combat elements, you'll like this. For obvious reasons, you can't dock at ports to engage in any sort of trading, although I do find the idea of a captain of Tzeentch crashing the Bretonnian market by flooding it with cheap Empire wine to be quite funny. You don't have to start by worshipping Khorne. You can be a warrior of any faction, and they are mostly the same. I suppose the Tzeentch guy flies, but that's not that special. With a little help from my wizard, I've made Empire ships do the same. Like a lot of games, there's also a skirmish mode you can access from the main menu. It's fine. Speaking as someone who enjoys the naval side of combat, I actually don't see much use for it. The combat is fun by itself, true, but it's most fun within the grander narrative you're building for yourself. This doesn't really accomplish that. A final little note on DLC. There are 3 of them, one of silly hats. I paid 19 pence for this when it was on sale, and I still feel robbed. 19 pence for this little griffin who keeps crew morale up. He's a good boy. And finally, a pack containing the art book for the game and the novel called Fell Cargo. I already briefly mentioned it. The art book has entirely convinced me that the 2 brothers behind the company were massive Warhammer fans. I think they had a real passion for the IP and tried hard to make a good game. Despite some rough edges, I think that shows in the gameplay too. And listening to community feedback seems to be a real priority for them. The novel is written by Dan Abnett. You can buy it separately if you want. You don't have to own the game. I won't harp on about it here. This game has flaws. Quite a lot of them, I suppose. I enjoyed my time with it, but truthfully, I wouldn't be surprised if someone told me they didn't. In my experience, the ship-to-ship combat is enjoyable, and even the melee stuff, if a bit rough at times, can have its moments. The cultures of the game try to have their own feel to them. It can really feel like you're travelling when you're heading down the coast. There is also a lot of choice in the game when it comes to the broad strokes and how you're going to do things. What ship will you use? What strategy do you prefer? Do you want to be a privateer under a specific faction? A pirate? A trader or monster hunter? Lone wolf or admiral of your own fleet? The game gives you a lot of freedom, and you can do a lot with that. I can't guarantee it's for everyone. There is no story to hold together the mechanics, beyond the driving forces you give yourself. So if you're uninterested by those mechanics, there isn't going to be much here for you in the long run. There's no denying it can feel kind of unpolished. The quests can feel repetitive after a while, as a lot of the ones generated by the notice board follow some very similar lines. It begins to feel like the game is miles wide but only an inch deep. I think it could have been really great with a little more polish, but even as it stands, it has that shape-your-own-adventure quality to it, similar to beloved games like Mount & Blade. But if you enjoy the idea of an open world, player-driven story, and the gameplay described here intrigues you, it is worth keeping in mind. It has regrettably been removed from Steam due to licensing issues, but GOG still has it. And if you're on the fence about it, which is something I could hardly blame you for, you can always buy it on sale.